going to start the recording so we can get started. Looking forward to our presentation from DJ. Thank you, DJ. I think you should have screen sharing capabilities. So if you have your stuff, we'll go ahead and do our roll call if we want to start with that, as typically we do for our Leadership Academy. So first, we'll start with California.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is Amory here in California.
Anyone else?
Department of California Rehabilitation, sorry.
Good to have you.
Good morning. This is Araceli Holland, also from Department of Rehabilitation in California. Good morning.
Good morning.
Or good afternoon, right?
Yes, for us this afternoon. Good morning to you. Anyone else from California?
This is Cynthia from California. Good morning and good afternoon as well.
Thanks for being on.
Thank you.
Next we have Illinois. All right, what about Kentucky?
Good afternoon, this is Tony Perry with Kentucky Vocational Rehabilitation.
Hey, Tony.
Hi, it's Nancy with Kentucky Vocational Rehabilitation.
Hi, Nancy.
Hello.
Anyone from Louisiana on? All right, what about
Hi,
Montana?
I'm Rosalyn. I'm with Open Healthcare Clinic partner.
Yes, thank you, Rosalyn. Thanks for being on today. All right, Louisiana's in the house. What about Montana? All right, next would be New Hampshire. What about New Jersey? Any representation from New Mexico? All right, North Carolina.
Beth Newcomb, Rocky Mountain Vocational Rehabilitation.
Hey, how are you?
Doing pretty good.
Thank
We're
you.
having a cool streak here too, which is a kind of a welcome relief.
Yeah, it is a welcome relief. Anyone else from North Carolina? What about Oregon? All right, South Carolina. And Virginia. Did I miss anyone? Any partner on today that I missed earlier? I know we had some people out this week for vacation. John Walsh couldn't be on because he's on vacation, as well as Dr. Susan Flowers Benton had a medical emergency and she couldn't be on. So for the rest of you who are on, thank you for joining us and being with us today. I'm excited to be able to hear from DJ Ralston, who's going to share about community academies today. So I'm going to turn it over to you, DJ.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Robin. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Good afternoon to those of you in the other part of the country. My name is DJ Ralston. I work for George Washington University. I'm one of the Project E3 staff. Have been working mostly with Virginia and New Jersey, although I have floated around to some of the other states. Kentucky, I've been with y'all. Oregon as well. North Carolina, I've been there too. So kind of bounced around a bit depending on what folks need. So anyway, so we're going to talk a bit about partnership development today, and specifically using something called the Community Academy. So I'll give you kind of the basics of that as we get to it. But the first thing that I really wanted to do was to talk about creating local advisory councils. And actually a community academy is a great vehicle to be able to create a local advisory council, or rather it's a great vehicle that gives a local advisory council, or kind of like an interagency group, something to do. So if we think about that, like within the states that I work closely with as an E3 partner. In both of those states, we created local advisory councils. And actually one of the things that we did was we kind of like looked around first to see if there were any already existent multi-stakeholder groups. So specifically, we were mostly looking at ones that were probably geared around disability to begin with. So like, I know that most of us on the phone are from VR. So we were working directly with the VR agency, and they had a couple in both the locations that we were in. There were some like disability issues type committees that were there. And one of the things that we did was we were just like, okay, great. This can form kind of like a local group that can kind of drive some of this work. But what we wanted to do was kind of open up that little group just a little bit. And we did that intentionally because there were some kind of non-traditional partners that VR wasn't necessarily always working with. And those were the folks that really were, or let me put it this way, if they were working with them, it was kind of like more at a kind of cursory coordination level. So what we wanted to do is get representation from some of the poverty programs. So some of those community-based agencies and government programs that specifically were geared towards serving people who were living in poverty. And part of that is because when we think about that intersection of disability and poverty, and we think about kind of that Venn diagram, that Venn diagram is almost a perfect circle. So what the research tells us, right, and what we know experientially as VR counselors, quite frankly, is that if you are serving people with disabilities, you are often serving people who are living at or below the poverty level, particularly if they're getting Social Security benefits, certainly if they're getting SSI, and in many instances, even if they're getting SSVI, they're still living at or below, or maybe just above the poverty level, right? And likewise, what happens is you know, when you've got these agencies that are focused on poverty programs like community action programs, who may be the agency who's providing like, you know, heating assistance or electric assistance and some of those kind of subsidies to lower income houses, a lot of times those households actually have people who are experiencing disability, maybe not even aware of it. And so what happens is we find that like kind of the folks that are doing the poverty or anti-poverty work and the folks that are doing the disability work, there isn't always a lot of connection. And so what we wanted to do in creating our local advisory councils is to kind of bring those two groups together, because there really is kind of a common core of customers there that they're serving, our clients that they're working with. And so one of the ways that we thought to do that was to invite some additional intentional participation within that local advisory council. So creating a local advisory council, a couple of things. It's like we saw it as a key component to addressing larger issues associated again with that intersection of disability and poverty, right? And it can serve as the vehicle to kind of, you know, garner input, solicit buy-in, forge those new partnerships and strengthen existing ones. But if y'all are anything like me, you're like, oh goodness, like meetings, right? Like I don't need another meeting for the sake of meeting, right? So that's one of the things that like we would, like part of the reason that we wanted to talk about this community academy is this is actually a tangible activity that you can get kind of a multi-stakeholder group together to start planning and to do together. Like, so it gives that group a focus. So that way you're not just meeting for the sake of meeting and kind of like identifying all the problems and then there's, you know, no traction to move forward. The other thing is the way that we tend to frame out a community academy is that community academies are really designed to help a community of service providers get to know other service providers. So a community academy, contrary to what it may sound like, is not actually geared towards consumers or clients. It is only geared at this juncture towards the community partners. And the reason that we originally developed this kind of concept and mapped it out, this actually came, like, just to share with y'all, this actually came from an idea of what, from when I was working in Alaska. So I actually started my career in Alaska working for the public workforce system, first under the WIA Title I adult program, which is now WIOA adult program. I actually started my career there and then made the jump to VR. But in my time, like in Alaska, one of the things that we often found was like, we never kind of like, we recognized that there were a lot of times like resources that our clients needed that were beyond our own program's ability to provide, but we didn't necessarily know where to provide them. So I don't know if for you all, like, if that's something that you're like, yep, that's something that happens to us, right? Like that we typically don't remember or like don't know necessarily where all of those resources are. So that was part of what happened here, was that we wanted to like we wanted to come up with a way back then for us to learn about each other's programs. And so they developed something called a one-stop academy. So that's pretty consistent, like that language is consistent historically, right? With the One-Stop Career Center is the American, like, which is now the American Job Centers. Who knows how much that language has changed. But the whole point being is like we needed an opportunity for us to get together and kind of like share what our different programs did. Now, we also recognize, as you all I'm sure probably do, that like you're never going to necessarily know like every single kind of like nuanced piece of every program, and we don't necessarily expect that. But what we do hope comes out of a community academy is it becomes an opportunity for you to learn about the different resources that are in your community that potentially your clients could access, that they may not be aware of and that you may not be aware of. And like, we know how easy it is to kind of get in the groove of what you're doing, right? And like, you know, we know what our process is. We have like our orientation. We like do our eligibility like people complete their applications. We do the eligibility determination. We get folks in the door, provided they're not on a, you know, not in a closed category. We get folks through the door and, you know, we start talking to them. We do some assessments typically, and then like we start to do the plan development. But I know you all know that within the context of that plan development, there's almost always stuff that like we can't provide, right? So the whole idea behind the Community Academy is that it gives you an opportunity to essentially be able to take a look at like what else is out there. And I guess to tie this back to that kind of earlier conversation, if we think about that intersection of disability and poverty, one of the things that we know is that a lot of times people are living in poverty, they have a lot of resource needs, right? And those resource needs are extensive because quite frankly, poverty in and of itself creates this instability that's created by a lack of resources, right? So one of the things that we know is that not every program, there's not a single program that's going to be able to meet every single one of the needs of every single one of their consumers. Like, and so I would just ask you all, like, maybe to kind of concede that point to me and bear with me. Like, I'm thinking those of you who you work in an agency, you know that there are things that you're not going to be able to provide. And likewise, your partners, there's things your partners can't provide either, but that maybe you can provide. So what we thought was like, is if we can bring all of these agencies together, now you could be like, DJ, COVID, don't worry, we're going to talk about how a community academy can be done both in person, which I will tell you, I've done them both ways, and I would prefer the in-person model, but like in the age of a pandemic, we need to look at how we can adapt that for virtual delivery, and we've done that. So a community academy is really designed to bring together multiple service providers. And when I say multiple service providers, I mean any possible entity that is touching the lives of people who are living in poverty. So like, if you think about this is going to be vocational rehabilitation. These could be your core workforce partners, like, which could include, you know, your American Job Center. It could include your WIOA, adult and dislocated worker programs, your adult basic ed programs. But we're also talking about TANF. We're talking about your SNAP program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP Employment and Training Program, right? We're talking about your mental health programs. We're talking about your mental health clubhouses. We are talking about your centers for independent living. We are talking about your community action programs. And quite frankly, the list goes on, and I'm going to get to that in 2 slides, or actually the next slide. And additionally, like, I think that we sent all that out. Robin, did we send all that out to everybody, or like at least people can get it afterwards, right?
No, I've been off, so I'll post that on our Project A3 website and send it with the follow-up recording.
All right, perfect. Yeah. So y'all, I'm gonna kind of like reference some resources, and I'll share my screen so that you can see the resources and not just like the little snapshots that are on the slides. But we've developed some resources that Robin's going to post with this recording and the PowerPoint or whatever. So hopefully it'll make your lives a little bit easier if this is something you're really interested in wanting to do. But a community academy essentially provides an opportunity for all participants that are there to like learn about programs and resources in their own community that may be helpful to the clients that they're serving. It gives them an opportunity to meet other professionals who work with the same populations and establish contacts at other programs. So like, this is a really big one for me. Like, and I joke, you know, hey, I'm a millennial. I do not like using the phone. And it's even worse if you're actually asking me to cold call somebody. I'm gonna be like, you want me to do what now? So that's one of the really great things about the community academy is it actually gives you an opportunity to meet people and like establish a relationship, right? And like, even in the virtual one, if you're using a platform like Zoom, we do some breakout stuff. I don't want to hashtag spoiler all of that for you, but really the community academy, like one of the biggest things it offers actually is an opportunity to network. It also gives folks an opportunity to learn about services and other agencies and programs. And this is to help reduce the duplication required by our clients, because this inevitably always comes out within the context of a community academy. And then finally, to understand the outcomes of other programs and therefore find common ground. And that's actually a really big piece of this too, is one of the things that happens within the context of this is people start to recognize that, hey, like, yeah, maybe employment, which is, you know, obviously we all know like VR's main goal, maybe that isn't the main goal of my program, but in almost every instance for social service programs, like getting a job is a piece of their, like, is going to be a contributor to that person reaching that program's goals. You know, one of the things I often get, and y'all are very quiet, so I'm going to tell you, like, feel free to interrupt me, and also feel free to like throw things in the chat if you have questions as we're going along. I'm pretty informal, as you can see, but one of the things that, like, so I actually, the very first community academy we did was in a rural area, rural community, small, rural, pretty tight-knit community. And the folks there were like, we don't need to do this. We know everybody. Turns out, not so true after all. So even in the places where you think you know everything, one of the things that like I would encourage y'all to think about is like, even in places like that, like oftentimes there are programs and projects. E3 is a good example of this, right? Like that there are projects and programs that are kind of coming in and out, like, right? Like they're kind of always in a state of flux. Like there's different projects or programs. So you may know the players, but you may not be aware of all the different things that they have going on. And maybe they didn't think to tell you all at VR, like, hey, we've got this new program, because they're not necessarily seeing kind of that overlap of the folks that you're serving. So a community academy in that sense is actually a really good opportunity for us to like kind of look at that constantly shifting landscape, right? And get a better understanding of it. And in fact, like I can tell you in the states where we've done these, you know, those states have decided they're like, yeah, we're going to be doing these every 6 months, or we're going to do it once a year, because it's actually something that can be done for like almost low to no cost. Yes, Robin, that's a great point. It's also a great way to help people unlearn misunderstandings about your programs and services. Yes, especially for those of us in VR who are in order of selection, right? Like it's a great opportunity for us to be able to explain what that means and kind of reduce some of the stigma of like, you're just that program that we send everybody to and they have to go on a waiting list forever. Like, so we stop sending people. It's actually a really, it opens up a lot of doors. So Robin, thanks for that point. So who should be at the community academy? So remember that I said that this is not for consumers, which is very true. I'm going to stop this share for a second, and instead I'm going to share Microsoft Word. Which one do I want? You know what? We're just going to do this. We're going to share desktop 1 and do it that way. Here, oh, that's why, because I didn't actually bring up that list. So let me see if I can actually get that to you guys. I apologize for that, y'all. But basically, remember that the whole point of the community academy is for service providers to come together. So again, this is not going to be something that you're going to be looking at relative to consumers. The idea is that you want to get as many different service providers that are, quite frankly, like, and that are touching the lives of folks who are living at or below the poverty level. So, and that, like, and you'll see in a minute when we talk about the invitation, we actually don't even necessarily mention disability, and that's specific. Like that's actually not specific, that's intentional. And the reason for that is because oftentimes people hear disability and they go, whoa, that's not us. Like we don't serve those people. When in reality, what we find is oftentimes they are serving those folks and they just don't know it. So, you know, it may not be folks with super obvious disabilities, but as we know, not everyone that we are serving in VR is somebody that has a visible disability, right? So we actually specifically like stay away from that, and that's okay, because quite frankly, we at VR, like we're also, you know, part of the disability expert community, right? So, but we do talk about people who are living in poverty or so you'll see this is kind of like a really generic list, and this is something that Robin has that she'll post with this recording to just kind of give you guys like a brainstorming list of places to get started about who should be there. So, you know, obviously USVR, who are your core partners in the workforce system, looking at social service programs like, you know, health and social services, what are they running? TANF, SNAP, WIC, looking at your community work incentive providers or your WIPAs, your work incentive project assistants, like your folks that are doing the benefits planning, right? Your housing programs, looking at public housing. Are there case managers in your public housing program, your Section 8 housing program? What about the Center for Independent Living? Mental health programs, case managers, clubhouses, behavioral health programs, community mental health, community rehab providers, looking at reentry programs. What does that look like? Your probation and your parole, school districts, faith-based organizations is another big one. A lot of the volunteer networks, like I actually will tell you that we had some of the volunteer folks coming, and like that made a huge difference because they also, those volunteers who oftentimes can become a first point of contact for our folks, or like our consumers who are connecting and learning things through their faith communities, like those volunteers oftentimes are the ones who are going to help connect them to those programs, right? So it creates a place for outreach too that helps other agencies and programs and volunteer networks essentially like do some of your outreaching for you. Cultural centers, domestic violence programs, homeless programs, the United Way, any of your community action programs, you bank and credit unions, like if there's local community banks and credit unions, they participated in this before. So the community action agencies, healthcare discharge coordinators. Y'all, one time we had it was pretty good. We had a director of a funeral home, believe it or not. So the story was that director actually saw the invitation and like wanted to learn more because they were a funeral home that never turned anyone away based on inability to pay. So oftentimes they were seeing folks who were, you know, essentially in really tough situations with like having just lost, you know, a loved one, which sometimes was like the loved one who was like the predominant breadwinner, and now like this family's like in complete disarray. So they were like, yeah, we wanted to come find out about the different, you know, types of resources that are available in the community so that we can direct people who are, you know, in addition to like handling bereavement stuff, we can help them actually get connected to resources. So we had somebody from the public library come actually. So that's another one that's probably not even on that list actually. So just kind of like thinking about those pieces, there's a fair amount there. So if we go back to the PowerPoint, so the Community Academy sample list, that's something that we'll give you. And then, so just to give you guys like a little, like, I guess kind of back up for just a second. Part of what we do within the Community Academy is we set it up ahead of time. Like the Community Academy is they get 3 minutes. Every agency or every program, let's put it this way, each program gets 3 minutes. And you're like, wait, what? 3 minutes, that's it. So they get 3 minutes to be able to talk about what their program is, like, and by that, like name of the program, who they serve, what services they provide, and what their outcomes are. And the reason that we do that is because you want to keep it short, because you don't want people sitting through a 40-minute presentation like this. Because could you imagine trying to hear from 30 agencies that are all running PowerPoint? So there's actually a no PowerPoint rule unless it's a virtual one, and that's a different story. But really within the context of that, like as I was talking about it, like you get to learn who the agency is, you get to learn who that agency serves. So that's kind of like the basic eligibility criteria, right? And then you also get to learn what resources or services they're providing, and then what their outcomes are. With those 3 pieces of information, you pretty much have everything that you need to be able to help your consumer or clients kind of like navigate and connect to those different resources. So we gave you the sample list. So we have a sample invite as well, which I think is, here we go. So I realize this is not super big, but I will make it a little bit bigger. So Robin will post this as well. What we've done is we've given you a sample invite. You can slice and dice this any way you want. Like, you don't have to use this at all. We just like to give folks something so that they have what they want going on. So, you know, and again, you'll notice, like, do you ever feel like your agency organization doesn't have enough resources to help the folks in your community that you're working with? Do you want to know more about resources available in your community for the persons your agency organizations like serves and how your clients can access those services? That right there, that kind of like lead in, we found is to be really effective. So you'll notice too, we do actually, so I guess I did kind of fib earlier. We do actually mention disability here, but we say, well, this event does include disability. It is not to the exclusion of poverty. If other people have better language for how to address that, by all means do that. But we make folks aware that this event is not intended for clients, because that is an important piece of this. And that it really is, you know, we ask people to come prepared to share in 3 minutes or less, no PowerPoints allowed. We are very explicit, the following information. So again, what is their eligibility, which is going to tell us who they're serving, what services they provide, and the goals of their program. So again, like, we created this invite, we'll share that with you. So our kind of rule is you should send the invite a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks in advance, but no more than 6 weeks. We've had some experience with this. If you do that, people start to like forget that it's on their calendar. We would encourage you, like, our best practices are to send a reminder 7 to 10 days before the event and then 1 to 2 days beforehand. We encourage you to leverage existing listservs and distribution lists. So this goes back to why it's also good to have that local advisory council that we talked about in the beginning, right? Because if you have a multi-stakeholder group kind of meeting and helping to plan and develop this, then they're going to have their own set of DIS lists, right? Like, all those different entities, a lot of them will have different pockets that they're going to reach that maybe your organization won't. So that's one of the nice things about having a multi-stakeholder group that's going to plan something like this. The other thing is like, maybe you can create that multi-stakeholder group just specifically to talk about wanting to plan and do one of these community academies. And then who knows, maybe the group sticks around afterwards and continues to address stuff. So that's just a thought. So then we have the ability to use Google Forms. Like, so we recommend using Google Forms. And the reason why is because essentially you are able to create a Google form that is going to contain all of the information that you are looking for within the context of the Google form, which then becomes something that you can actually download. So for example, here's a community academy registration. So you'll notice we put kind of up here in the box, right, the description of what the event is. And then we talk about, you know, like, you would include all this pertinent information. This was actually the one that I created the last time when I was doing this for folks. So let me pick another one. Here's the virtual one. So this is good enough. So put all the information. So the what, the who, the when, the where. So this one's actually for one of the virtual ones. You'll notice up here we have 82 responses. So this was a pretty popular event. But in addition to kind of the who, what, when, where, what you'll want to do is within the context of the Google form, you'll want to create, create boxes that are name, title, name of the organization, and then you get at those questions, right? Like, so what is the basic eligibility criteria? What services does your agency provide? And what are the goals or outcomes that your agency is searching for? So then you're capturing all that information that people are going to stand up and talk about. And once you do that, you can actually come into the responses and you can click on this and create a Google sheet. If you click on that, and then all of your information is right there. So you've already captured all of that information about, like, the name of the organization, like the basic eligibility criteria. So now you've got a spreadsheet that includes all of that information and contact information. So We really do love that it's a Google form and it makes it like super easy, and then you're not trying to recreate the wheel. So again, like that's why we'd encourage somebody like you to use Google Forms. It doesn't have to be done that way by any means. This is a pretty intuitive form. Like if you're going to add a question, you just come hit the plus button. You'll be able to add a new field. If you do that, see what happens is this comes up. So this is your question box. You notice it's defaults to multiple choice. You just hit the drop down and then you can hit, oh, I want a short answer. And that gives the person the space. And then you toggle on the required button. So that's just a quick example. I show that because like I sometimes assume that everybody knows how to use Google Forms, but that is not always true. So I wanted to make sure that we showed you all that. So again, we actually have the directions for you all on how to do that in a separate handout. So starting with going to the forms, and then we like remind you that this is the stuff that you're going to put in the form description box. And then we actually, when you get down to number 5, it tells you exactly how to add and then what fields you should be adding. Also, don't forget to ask if people have accommodation requests. So, you know, for example, like for the physical one, for the in real life, the IRL or community academy, we need to know if people have any type of accommodation requests that they're going to need, you know, closed captioning or sign language interpreter for those types of events. So that's something to think about. That is one place where potentially costs could be incurred if you needed ASL interpreters, but most VR offices have a little bit of money in the bank for that type of stuff. So that would be something that maybe as the VR partner, you could potentially contribute, while maybe your workforce partners might contribute the free space in which you guys host your community academy. So let's get back to, we talked about creating the registration. So let's talk about what does a community academy actually look like? So you do need kind of an MC of sorts, somebody who can do the welcome and opening remarks. You know, that can be anybody from, you know, somebody fancy, you know, like, I don't know, like a district director or, you know, we've had commissioners open ours, to just whoever is kind of taking the point or taking the lead, or maybe it's that entire local advisory group gets up and welcomes everybody for being there. So welcome and opening remarks. During that, you want to give a brief overview and purpose of the community academy, which really, y'all, is just that information that gets included kind of in this portion, right? So you guys are actually seeing the Virginia examples on the slides, but the ones that the examples that we're going to post are generic. But you just want to give a brief overview and the purpose of it. Hey, the purpose of it is because we're all professionals and we're all serving kind of the same group of folks in and out here, right? Like, so it makes sense for us to get to know each other. It makes sense for us to know at least the basics of what our other programs do. As Robin points out, it gives us a good opportunity to dispel any myths or assumptions we're holding about certain programs, you know. So that's kind of it. Now, then we do an icebreaker, and we call it an introductory activity, but this, people, I will tell you, is actually pretty popular. People kind of moan and groan at me about it, but they end up doing it and they end up liking it. So we refer to it as speed dating. You basically set that up to take about 20 minutes. And then after the speed dating, and I'll explain a little bit more how that works on the next slide. After the speed dating, then you get into the agency organization presentations. And remember, it's 3 minutes per agency program, no PowerPoints. And then you can do a wrap up. You might be asking, like, DJ, 3 minutes, like that just still doesn't seem a lot. And like, what do you do when you get a talker, right? Don't worry, we have that worked out for you. So let's think about the logistics in person. Okay, so preferably a large space. A lot of times we have done this in community college spaces because the community college has been a partner of the Workforce Center, and the Workforce Center is able to reserve the space basically at no cost. Remember that the space needs to be accessible. Someone has asked me, can this be something that could be done at like maybe in a multi-purpose room in a public library? Yes, it can be, but you want to check with them and make sure that the library is okay with there being some noise coming out of the room, at least for the speed dating portion. So again, looking for free space is recommended. You can certainly pay for space if you have a budget, but a lot of times if you have a multi-stakeholder group that's working on this together, somebody knows somebody who knows somebody to get some free space, which essentially makes the event like basically free outside of, again, potentially ASL interpretation or card interpretation. And then whether or not you want to provide food, and we all know that food brings the people, but we also know that the feds don't like to pay for food. So if you're a federal program or a federally funded program, that's something to consider. But you want to make sure the space is someplace where a level of noise is acceptable. So this gets at, because speed dating does tend to get really loud. But this also gets at kind of like what I was saying about the whole, like, is a public library? Potentially, but if you can find other spaces that have good doors, that's probably key. So the way that we do speed dating in person is we essentially have two lines facing each other so that people are paired off, you know, so like face to face. And then each person basically introduces themselves, shares what their agency is, and you know what they're like, why they decided to attend the community academy. This is it. Like, and essentially the way that we set it up is we give each pair like 3 minutes. And then what happens is you have one line that constantly stands still, right? So like, let's say that the line that has their back to the window, they stay, they do not move at all. But at the end of the 3 minutes, the line that's facing them, everyone steps one person to their right. Well, what happens to the person in the front of the line, DJ? They go back to the back and they kind of walk around. So it does get loud. And a lot of times people will be like, I could barely hear anything. I'm not sure I learned anything. That's not necessarily the intention of the speed dating as much as it's just an opportunity to really get people to at least connect, you know, like face to face, eyeball to eyeball. And also, you know, like, yeah, it's really about the connection part. And like, in some ways it helps also anybody who might be a little bit nervous about getting up and speaking in front of the group. Once they've had a chance to meet a few people, that seems to kind of put people at a little bit more ease. So, like I said, speed dating accomplishes two things: a chance to network, it helps ease the nerves. So the next part is after the speed dating gets done, everybody kind of returns to their table. What you do want to remind folks is that they're welcome to take notes and you encourage it, but at the same time, all of the information that each one of these programs or agencies is going to talk about essentially has already been captured within that Google form, right? Because the Google form asks what their eligibility criteria is, what services they provide, and what the goals of their outcomes are, which is essentially what you're asking. You've reminded people at multiple points throughout this process that they're going to be asked to talk about this. So you remind them during the link in the invite, you remind folks as part of the reminder, don't forget, you're going to be asked to like stand up and talk for 3 minutes about what your agency does. Now you might be like, DJ, what happens if there's like 20 people there from the same agency? Guess what? Only one of them wins the lotto and has to talk, or they can all go up there together. But the point is that agency or program gets 3 minutes. TJ, what happens if they have more than one program? In the event that you have one agency that maybe has like, you know, 3 or 4 big programs, then we give them a few extra minutes, you know, use your discretion. The whole idea is that you don't have somebody like standing up there and droning on and on and on, kind of like I am today. You don't want that in a community academy. You want to keep it quick, right? So then you say, well, what happens when you do have somebody who's going to stand up there and drone on and on and on? Y'all, here's a trick. The Oscars music, and you let people know ahead of time. So as part of that transition from speed dating and everybody's getting settled, you say, okay, now we're going to start the, you know, agency presentations. And here's the deal. You get 3 minutes unless we negotiate because you have multiple programs, but then you only get X amount of minutes. When your time is up, you will hear the Oscars music start playing. And that is your cue, just like at the Oscars, to get off stage. This actually works really well. We included the link or a link to Oscars music in the PowerPoint, so you can check it out, but it's just a YouTube link, or Spotify. Any of those. Would strongly recommend that somebody kind of in the hosting group bring a little Bluetooth speaker that they can connect a smartphone to and be able to zip that music up. It's amazing at how effective it is. To keep people moving, and or if they do go over and then the music comes up, it's always a great kind of brief moment of levity, and then the person recognizes, oh yeah, I have to get off the stage. So yeah. So that's kind of like, that's kind of it for the in-person. Are there any questions about that? I realize I've been talking like 1,000 miles a minute. Robin, how are we doing on time? Because I know you said Dr. Benton Flowers isn't able to join us today, so I don't know how much that changes your agenda.
I mean, I'm still going to talk a little bit about the Leadership Academy 2.0, but you still have about 8 minutes.
Okay, I can do it. It'll be even less than that because this is basically the last slide, y'all. So what about a community academy event for the logistics if you're doing it virtual? So one, you need to make sure your web platform is accessible. Would strongly recommend Zoom in that aspect. It's probably one of the more accessible platforms. Two, because Zoom includes a breakout feature, you can still do the speed dating. So for anybody who's used Zoom breakouts, you can pre-assign people. I wouldn't recommend that. You can just actually go in and do random assignments. I would recommend that, because then and you can break them into however many groups. So if you've got 30 people, or let's say 32 people, you could break them into 8 groups of 4, and you kind of leave them in those breakout groups, and it gives them a chance to get to know folks. So there's still some kind of feeling relative to that. One of the things that we did do for the virtual one, so obviously I showed you all earlier, I'm like, oh, we had 82 people. So what we did is, because we request all of that information in the Google form, we essentially compiled all of that info into a PowerPoint. So basically each agency program had its own slide, because that also was and then we organized them alphabetically. So that way, when we all got onto the Zoom, people that were attending would know when it was their turn to present. Essentially, when their slide showed up, then they knew to take themselves off of mute and talk about their program. So it's not quite as lively, quite frankly, as the in-person one, but I think it was helpful. Then not only do people get the PowerPoint that has all of the agency information, they still get the Excel sheet that'll have all of that information. And so it proved to be effective. It also means that, if people sign up and then don't show up, all of that information for their agency's programs actually still in that PowerPoint. So in that case, maybe the host can kind of do a quick nod and say, well, lucky ducky company couldn't show up today, but they did give us this information or whatever. And so you still kind of get that information. And again, we actually did a couple rounds of the breakouts, because you can put people in breakouts more than once. You put them into breakouts in Zoom and then bring them back, and then put them into breakouts again, and more at random, and they get kind of paired. So you can do that a few times too, because that gives folks a chance to meet, essentially 8, 12 different people.
Do you include contact information in the Google form, or when they talk, they include their contact information?
So normally the contact information is in the Google form. So because they have to put, we would, and I think we do say that, we require people to include their name and their email and their position title. So that goes out in the Google form. One of the things that we didn't necessarily include that in the PowerPoint for the virtual one, Robin. And the reason for that is because most programs tend to stay, the programs, the program content, so i.e. the eligibility criteria, the services they're providing, and the outcomes are pretty static. But we often know that a lot of times within social service programs, and kind of, even in poverty programs, there's a lot of turnover. So the names may not always be as helpful long term, but certainly kind of that program information is, and that does get included in the Google form Excel sheet that we send out. So
I have another question. How often do your groups have at community academies? Is it a monthly thing? And what time of day? How long is it recommended that meeting lasts?
So the communities that I've been working in want to do it either biannually or annually. So twice a year, just because it is something that takes a bit of a lift. It is going to be something that's typically probably 2 to 3 hours in length, because in large part, some of that's going to depend on how many different programs and agencies are there that then need to get up and spend their 3 minutes. But you know, even like we had one where there was like, you know, 50 folks in attendance and there was probably like 26 programs represented. So, you know, it's and like once you add in the speed dating and kind of the transitioning and stuff, it's typically, you should plan for at least 3 hours. So, the Zoom one, I think we did it in 2 hours, but it was probably a good thing that we had a fair amount of like we probably had like a 30% no-show rate. So like 30% of the slides essentially were there, like, but there was no one there to talk about them. So yeah, this is a good question though. But most groups find enough value that they think doing it once or twice a year is definitely worth it, to account for kind of the different grant cycles and that kind of flux that we talked about earlier, as well as to account for staff turnover.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions, comments for DJ on community academies?
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. This has been great information. I live in Central Arkansas, and we have an organization of that's similar to a community academy, but it's not called a community academy. And we organize with faith-based organizations, community action agencies, VR, and other grassroots organizations that really meet the needs of people, like food banks and homeless organizations. Of course, some businesses that participate at workforce, adult ed. And our goal was to coordinate services, like you said earlier, get all these different organizations together so that they can coordinate, share information about who's doing what and what's available to people, like when community action isn't paying utility bills, where else can people go? And then to share data so that there's like a hub of services that are available. And what has come out of that process, we've been doing that for about 2 years, and what has come out of that is, instead of a community academy, is a community coffee. And before COVID, now that we have COVID, we're not getting together, but we need to do the virtual. But the community coffee was designed so that once a month, one agency would get 30 to 45 minutes where they would present, like you do in the community academy, in-depth information about their services and programs over coffee and donuts or whatever early in the morning. So that's the plan for when we go back to in-person. We haven't started a virtual meeting like you have.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing, like, so part of what we use the community academy for here was the fact that it becomes kind of the precursor to us implementing the integrated resource team. So anybody who was on last month's and like heard a little bit about the integrated resource team strategy, one of the nice things about this community academy is it essentially is a captive audience. And so within the context of Project E3, we were actually able to give the overview of the integrated resource team strategy to all of these partners that were in the room. And so then as VR started to embark upon utilizing the integrated resource team approach, when they started calling their partners and being like, hey, we're working with this, we're working with Joe, and we know that you're working with Joe, and we kind of like, or we think that Joe could be eligible for your program, like, and we'd like to get together and like have a team meeting, then those other agencies weren't necessarily caught off guard. It creates the fertile ground and the relationships essentially as the precursor to implementing that integrated resource team strategy by building knowledge and awareness of who your partners are and what services are available and who the players are prior to starting that. So that sounds like, as you're talking about your community coffee and like y'all getting together, like multiple agencies getting together to figure out how to work together. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So
great information. Thank you, DJ. And I think you also had your contact information on that PowerPoint at the end. So we'll share out all those resources, the PowerPoints, all the handouts, the documents that you can use and integrate that in with your local communities, and hopefully get some community academies started in your local community. So great information. It really speaks well to our sustainability, which we'll talk a little bit about next. As you all know, we do have our Leadership Academy 2.0 coming up, and that's going to be October 27th through the 27th, 28th, and 29th. I apologize, I got the dates wrong. But each day that will be from 2 to 4:30 p.m. Central Time. So again, please save the date on your calendars for our Virtual Leadership Academy 2.0, the 27th, 28th, and 29th of October. I'll be sending out registration information next week. Each day, we're going to take 2 hours to cover a major topic that you said was of value to you and that you would like to learn more about as you move forward with sustainability of your Project E3 plans. On the 27th, we'll talk about meeting the challenges of going virtual. And then after that, we'll talk about accessibility for people with disabilities. On the 28th, we'll talk about communicating with cultural competency. And then we're going to speak a little bit about communicating effectively within your organization, the political structure, how to get change done in your organization. On the 29th, we're going to cover social media and our target population, opportunities and barriers to reaching our target population. We do have speakers lined up for each of those presentations. So we're looking forward to having a group of diverse and dynamic speakers who are going to be sharing resources and information related to each of those topics. What I do ask you to think about as we prepare for the Leadership Academy, 2 questions is what parts of your sustainability, what part of your plan that you have going on in your local community do you want to focus on sustaining? Because the Leadership Academy is designed to address that. And then if you're thinking about those sustainability plans and what part you want to see go forward, think about how you're going to do it. How can we assist you in achieving the goals of your sustainability plans? I may be saying something that's a foreign language to you. If you're not familiar with your sustainability plan because you're fairly new to Project E3, to this communities of practice, let me know. And we'll get John Walsh and they'll share it with you so you'll have a better idea of what's been presented for your community. But those 2 overriding questions is, what do you want to see continue when the funding, when Project E3 comes to an end by the end of this year? And then how do you want to do it? So the Leadership Academy, the Virtual Leadership Academy is designed to address that and provide the tools and resources in alignment with those topics that we talked about to help you achieve the goals of your sustainability plan. Again, it's going to be October 27th, 28th, and 29th, 2 to 4:30. 2 to 4:30, is that right? Yes, each day in that Central Time. So please mark your calendars and be on the lookout. Next week, we'll get the registration information out to everyone. We also want to encourage you that to invite other participants in your organizations to be a part of it. It's not just limited to those of you who are coming to the monthly communities of practice. Anyone in your organization, if you have leadership in your VR agency or leadership in your community-based organization or education institution, they probably need to be here to be a part of that discussion about sustainability if you really want change to happen. So we want to invite them to come and participate as well. So be sure and share the information with them and encourage them to participate as well. Any questions or comments? John Walsh was off on vacation this week, and Dr. Flowers Benton had an emergency and couldn't participate, and both said their regrets and not being able to share a little bit more about the sustainability portion of the communities of practice. If not, again, thank you, DJ. It's very helpful, useful information. We appreciate you sharing with us today. We thank everyone for joining us today. Any other questions or comments? We certainly are looking forward to October. And again, we'll get that information out to you next week. And I'll follow up with the handouts that DJ shared today. We'll send those to you in an email. We'll also forward those onto our Project E3 website. If there's nothing else, you guys have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the weekend. Happy fall.